What is happening, fam? This is John from AF Anime, and today we're going to talk about One Piece chapter 1034, which is titled Sanji vs. Queen. And that title is pretty much on point because for the first time in a while, we actually spend the entire chapter with this one conflict. However, before we get into that fight, I'll do the usual review of the request cover page for this week. And this one's not terrible. The request itself is actually of Usopp winning a carnival or a festival game for a bunch of kids. And while it's not one of my favorites per se, it is cool to see Usopp using a gun, which I'm sure most One Piece fans assume he will be using at some point in the story, even if it would just be in a backup weapon kind of capacity. Ultimately, not a bad request cover page, but as I've said many times before, I'd much rather have a cover story. So moving on to the actual contents of the chapter, we start off with the first page being dedicated to the character Osome. And judging by her outfit, this is the woman that Sanji believed that he roughed up in a previous chapter. Now, it looks like before she escapes Onigashima, she's actually looking for her pet rat, who is named Chuji. Now, for this chapter, she actually does have some narrative importance, but more on that later, as the next page is actually dedicated to Momonosuke. And in the amazing panel, which is the first on this page, we see that Momonosuke actually has figured out the knack of Kaido's flame clouds. And this translation choice here is rather frustrating and unclear. It doesn't really let us know whether or not Momonosuke is creating his own clouds like Kaido does, or if he's just found out how to manipulate the clouds that Kaido has created. In either case, he doesn't have enough mastery over the clouds to push the island back up, so he has resolved to keep the island afloat. Now, this obviously means this can only be a temporary measure, as he eventually will run out of stamina and will have to drop the island. So it'll be very interesting to see how Oda decides to use this whole Momonosuke holding the island up situation to either add tension or to shorten the time frame that the heroes have to finish the rebellion. So those first 2 pages aside, the remainder of the chapter is actually dedicated to the namesake, which is Sanji versus Queen. And the chapter wastes no time showing us the action, as we get a bunch of named moves from Queen, which were all stolen from the Vinsmoke children. And those moves were called Sparking Valkyrie, Henry Blazer, and Winch Guillotine. And even though Queen aped all of those moves from Judge for himself, he renamed them Sparking Queen, Henry Queen, and Winch Queen. Now, Sanji does manage to dodge both attempts of the Sparking Queen, but he is hit with the Henry Queen and the Winch Queen. And in the middle of these attacks, Queen reveals that he actually was just feigning his curiosity about the stealth black suit, as he has already done research on Judge's technology. Now, Sanji appears to be quite fed up with Queen's discussion about his family, and after being hit with the Winch Queen, Sanji uses a kick to destroy or sever Queen's arm. Following this, Sanji mentions that he doesn't want to hear their names, and there's a little bit of comedic discussion from Queen and Sanji about the freedom of speech, before Sanji lands a move called Flanchet Flare. And that, mixed with the destruction of Queen's arm, it really seems that the damage for Queen is starting to mount up, and actually turn the tides of the battle into Sanji's favor. And that's something that Sanji actually notices in the chapter and points out to Queen, as he states that the damage that Queen has tacked on throughout this fight is really starting to show. And I think that Oda is really trying to sell this home, because the response that Queen has to Sanji pointing this out is just silence and labored breathing. So this could be a pretty straightforward way for Oda to tell us that Queen is in fact on his last legs. And fittingly so, the last move we see of this chapter, at least of Queen copying the Germa, is the Stealth Black. Now, he goes invisible, and Sanji mirrors this with using what appears to be a form of Soru. Now, it doesn't take Queen very long to discern that Sanji is just moving very quickly, but before he can interact with Sanji, he actually notices Osome. And then we get a page that explains the damage that she took, as well as Queen's relationship to her. Now, it appears that after Komurasaki faked her own death, Queen latched on to making Osome his girl, and after she repeatedly rejected his advances, he apparently roughed her up. Now, he called this divine punishment, but to me this kind of seems like a lazy version of, filling in a plot hole, as most of us knew Sanji wasn't going to rough up a girl, or at the very least definitely not an innocent female. So I guess the way this plot hole is filled is by this chapter revealing that Queen, I guess during Sanji's blackout, managed to rough up the female and thought it'd be appropriate to let Sanji think he did it. Now, that's just so far-fetched that I won't even address it, but it does give Sanji a reason to really want to take Queen out, as we know that beating women is something that Sanji is vehemently opposed to. Now, in a very convenient twist, Osome happens to be in an area where the fight is going on, and Queen decides to ignore his opponent, who is moving at high speed somewhere near him, to use this chance as an opportunity to rough up Osome again. Now, before that can happen, we see that Sanji is flying overhead, and Oda goes ahead and gives us a couple panels giving us the full breakdown of Sanji's confirmed power-ups, which for the most part is the exoskeleton and increased muscles and speed, all of which increase strength. And when he adds his armament haki to this, it means that his body is more durable and he can deal with greater heat to his flames. And this power-up is put on display in the form of a new move called Ifrit Jambe. And if you didn't know, Ifrit or Ifrit is a Islamic reference to a kind of demonic underworld figure. So in any case, this Ifrit Jambe kind of seems to have a power-up version of Diablo Jambe. And while the flames are in this Ifrit mode, it seems to give him a faster acceleration and a heavier frame. And before Queen can get his hands on Osome, Sanji proceeds to beat the piss out of Queen with a barrage of attacks, the first of which is a Collier Coup, or a Collier Coup if I mispronounced that. So this attack actually knocks Queen out of his stealth black mode, and this is where Sanji opens up a can by using 9 different named moves on Queen in a row. And these named moves are as follows, and you got to forgive my enunciation or pronunciation of these French words, but it starts with Basses Côté Blast, Paluron Pound, Jamal Al Biftek Blitz, Tendron Tenderizer, another Flanchet Flayer, Qa Crippler, Poye Poker, Jare Jarrer, and Buef Burst. Now, the amazing panel that is the Buef Burst seems to wrap this chapter up. However, we don't get any reveal or actual confirmation that Queen has officially been defeated. Now, this is a very interesting choice on Oda's behalf, as we know that the Straw Hats don't typically kill their opponents, and also that Queen is a very likable character. So as with the chapters in, I think most of us can assume that the fight has ended. Whether or not Queen is going to be available for more dialogue or more interactions later, we don't really know. Alright, so now that the chapter recap is done, we can go ahead and get on with the rating and discussion. So in regards to the rating, I usually start off with artwork. This chapter will be no different. And for this chapter, I'm going to go ahead and give the artwork an 8. While there was really no super impressive panels, there were a couple cool looking ones. I think the highlight of this chapter's artwork was really in its blacks and its whites and its shading. Now, narrowly, in regards to manga, I would say that the blacks, whites, and shading of any manga is what sets its tone or its feel. But with One Piece in particular, it seems to be kind of inconsistent in how it's used for each and every chapter. Now, I think that it's done very well in this chapter, but as I've mentioned, the general outlook of the artwork isn't super defined or super detailed. And to kind of sell this point, if you take a look at this image here, where you should be able to see Momonosuke's first reveal of his dragon form, it's incredibly detailed, almost scale for scale. Now look at this chapter's reveal of Momonosuke's dragon form. Now, while it still is an amazing looking panel, you can tell that it's just kind of inconsistent with the amount of effort and detail that we've seen throughout Wano so far. Now, moving on to the rating for the story, I'm also giving that an 8. Now, narratively, there isn't a whole lot that we learned from this chapter. It's just I'm giving it an 8 in particular because of its fluidity in storytelling, which is similar to the last chapter. Now, in terms of its relation to the story, it ultimately is a great fight and well told and well depicted. It is just that I feel like they could have put a little more time and effort into making this story a little more revealing to at least the outcome, or at the very least showing us more information that's actually relevant to the overall storyline. But one thing I really did enjoy in terms of the storytelling aspect of this chapter were the combination of named moves that Sanji landed on Queen. Having it panel by panel for the breakdown of each named move just really sold us on the idea of Sanji really laying down the ass whooping to Queen and giving us the impression that this fight is actually over without showing us that the fight is actually over. So storytelling wise, great chapter, just not the best. And the last of my 3 general ratings is going to be the hype, of which I'm going to give this chapter a 9. Now, as usual, all fight-based chapters almost default get a high hype rating. This one is getting a 9 because it's not necessarily the peak pinnacle of excitement in the world of One Piece. I mean, we do get an amazing fight with Sanji and Queen. In particular, the hype levels of the last couple pages were incredibly well managed. However, when it comes to this chapter's informational hype, we don't get a whole lot to look forward to. I mean, there was the one page with Momo and his whole situation, but there's really nothing new that we learned there aside from the fact that, he's getting a little bit better at managing the clouds. But even with that situation, we don't spend enough time with him to really get any emotional change in the situation that he was already in for the past few chapters. And considering that we aren't immediately moving into another fight as far as we can tell, I would say that the hype levels for the next chapter are kind of just non-existent. We honestly have no idea to assume or know where this next chapter is going to go. So ultimately, a very hyped chapter, just not the perfect kind of hype that we've seen before in Wano. Alright, so with the combination of those three ratings, that gives our overall weekly rating of this chapter an 8.3. Not mind-blowing by any means, but still fairly consistent with what Wano has given us to expect. So now it's time for a brief discussion on this chapter, and the first thing that I want to address is actually Sanji's character growth throughout this arc. And while he does mention multiple times that he's resolved his mind a little bit more, or he seems to have, kind of grown into his techniques and abilities, we don't really get a full display on how that's going to affect his ability to interact with other people or other villains. But we do, however, get the confirmation that he has officially powered up, which is a good thing, I suppose. But when it comes to Sanji in particular for this arc, it seems like it was a bit drawn out and it was made over dramatic as compared to how dramatic the situation actually was. Kind of like the whole Osome thing. Like, we knew Sanji didn't rough up any female, even if Oda was ballsy enough to go down that path. It just doesn't fit with the character. Plus, to my knowledge, I don't recall ever seeing anything to imply that the Vinsmoke children were prone to blacking out and doing messed up things. And then with Sanji running away from the fight while he was trying to deal with his internal, guilt or his fear of becoming like his siblings, it just kind of had that soap opera feel and felt a bit out of place for what One Piece has been so far. I mean, I suppose there's still time for Oda to kind of draw it out and make it a bit more, interpersonal, but it just felt kind of out of place and rushed. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, which is going to be very brief, is going to be Osome. Now, it isn't really clear if she's going to have some overarching narrative when it comes to the story of Wano, but I will say that it feels like she got a bit more attention in this chapter than would have been required for her just to be like a plot device for Sanji to defeat Queen. So it'll be very interesting to see if she will join Sanji for the remainder of this arc, or possibly even play a role in helping the non-combatants escape the island. I mean, Sanji can technically fly, and if he were to play the role of the evacuation ship, more or less, he could begin taking people down to the flower capital or to somewhere safe, considering that his fight with Queen is over. So there's that possibility, but the last thing I want to talk about is the Momonosuke situation that we get one page of for this chapter. Now, maybe this might be clearer in the Japanese language, but the translation at least seems to be a bit more vague than it needs to be. As I said before, early in the chapter, it isn't really clear if Momonosuke has just grasped mirroring Kaido's powers, or if he actually is just manipulating Kaido's clouds. And I think this might be intentionally vague or unclear because the path of Momonosuke from this point forward should be straightforward. I mean, he tries to keep the island afloat and then eventually moves it to safety, or maybe he's just going to keep it afloat long enough to drop it on the flower capital once it's been evacuated. Now, I personally think that as longtime readers, we could probably come to this conclusion on our own without needing a page of exposition to show us that there's been no development, really. But I suppose it'll be interesting to see a little more time with Momonosuke to figure out his dragon powers and how it's going to affect the saving of Wano. In any case, that's all I have for this review on chapter 1034 of Wano, Sanji vs. Queen. Now, let me know in the comment section down below if you think that this fight between Queen and Sanji is over, or just your general thoughts on the chapter and the arc of Wano so far. Also, if you've made it this far in the video, please don't forget to hit that like button. I would greatly appreciate it. And also subscribe for more One Piece reviews and more One Piece related content. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in. My name is John, I'm with AF Anime, and I will catch you guys in the next video.